Good day, everyone, and welcome to the EDUC tree, which is the Facilitating Learner-Centered Teaching. So, for today, we will be discussing a new lesson, which is the Module 9, entitled The Gestalt Psychology. But before we proceed to our formal discussion, let me introduce first myself. So, my name is Ana Flor B. Alperes, and I am the reporter for this topic. So, before we going to discuss the Module 9, which is the Gestalt Psychology, let us first have a pre-activity. So, in this activity, you are going to examine the picture below. And in a one-part sheet of paper, you are going to write your perception about the given picture. I will be giving you 5 minutes to answer and write down your perception. So now let us tackle the Module 9, which is the Gestalt Psychology. Okay, so here are the learning objectives of this topic. So at the end of this module, the student will be able to describe the different Gestalt principles, list ways of applying Gestalt psychology in the teaching learning process, and lastly is to demonstrate the appreciation of the usefulness of Gestalt principle in the teaching learning process. Okay, so by the way, what is Gestalt psychology class? So when we say Gestalt psychologist class, it served as the foundation of cognitive perspective to learning. So from the word itself, psychology, so it means it is all about the our thinking, which is the cognitive. Therefore, Gestalt psychology class is considered a mental processes. So it's all about in our mind and it is also a product of our perception. So in advanced organizer class, as you see in the picture, in Gestalt psychology, we are going to tackle the Gestalt principles, the insight learning, and lastly is the life's phase. So, in Gestalt principles, it has the 6 principles. The first one is the law of proximity, and then the law of similarity, the law of closure, the law of good continuation, the law of good fragments, and lastly is the law of figure or the ground. And then while in the life space, it has the inner force and then the outer force. So we will going to tackle all of that in this lesson or in this module. So the Gestalt theory class is the initial response to behaviorism. So from the word itself, Gestalt class, it means it is a form or configuration. So when we say that it is initial to behaviorism is that before we act, we perceive first. We have first our perception before we go to the behavior. So according to the three psychologists, which are Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and then Kurt Kafka, so they are the three psychologists who studied perception and conducted that the perceivers are not passive but they are the active. So the perceivers class, the main here is that it is the learners. They suggested that the learners are not just about they collect the information, so they are not the passive, but they also actively process and restructure the data. The way they process it, they call the perceptual process. So in perceptual process class, there are some factors to be considered, just like our past experience, our needs, and also our attitude, but also our present situation that can affect our perception. For example, class, we attend a teacher lecture in the subject of mathematics, and then while we attend, we witness it that it is boring. So, in the other and the next day, there is another lecture in mathematics, and then we can already perceive on it that mathematics lecture is boring. So that one of the example in our past experience that affect our perception. So in our perception class, the way we form our perception, it is guided by a certain principles in the Gestalt psychology, which we are going to tackle today. So this Gestalt principles class determines what we see and what situation we have met. So the first principle class that we are going to tackle is the law of proximity. So when we say the law of proximity class, the elements that are close together will be perceived as a coherent object, which means they perceive or it will perceive that they belong together. So as you see in our presentation class, there is an example of the law of proximity, which is the dots or the puzzle bus. So in that example, on the left side, it appears that there is one group because they are close together and the way we see it, it only one group. While on the right side class, there we can perceive it that there are three different groups. So the second principle that we are going to tackle is the law of similarity. So from the word itself, similarity, so we can see the similarities. So here we have an example, which is the logo of NBC. So in the image, as you see, there are the feathers that has different colors, but we can perceive it that they are similar because of the shape. That's the law of similarity class. So now, let us proceed to the law of closure class. So in the law of closure class, we tend to fill the figures by completing the contour. Just for example in the picture. So here we have an example of the advertisement for lens. So as you see in the picture, there is the picture of the advertisement for lens. So the advertiser here is tried to construct a smiley face with the use of the objects and the sentences. Because of that, we already perceive that it is a smiley or a happy. Though there is not an entire image on smiley, but we tend to perceive the missing detail and imagine it as a happy face. And that's the example of the law of closure. So now let us proceed to the law of good continuation. So from the word itself, good continuation class, so it involves the continuous line. So here in the examples, we have the Amazon logo. So there in the picture or in its logo, we have an arrow line which is pointing starting from A to G, which it depicts that the Amazon has everything in their store from A to Z. Law of good fragrance. So in the law of good fragrance class, it refers to asymmetry, simplicity, and regularity of the pattern. Here we have an example of the Olympics logo, which is we can already perceive once we see it. So here we see it that there are five circles. So we can already perceive that there are five circles. So that's what the law of good fragrance is. So it means that there is a simplicity of the pattern or the figure, and then there is also the symmetrical or the regularity. So that's the law of good fragrance class. So now let us proceed to the last principles, and it is the law of figure or ground. So in these principles, we perceived a certain object to its foreground and its background. So but most of us, as the way we see the picture, we first pay attention to its foreground than to its background. So here we have an example of the face and vase illustration. So as you see in the image class, there are the faces and the vases, which depends on our way of perception class. So if we see the white as a figure, then it is perceived that it is a man and the vice versa. So now let us proceed to the insight learning class. So in insight learning class, our learning takes place in our discovery and insight. So it means that it involves our deep intuitive understanding class and not by the reinforcement. So Wolfgang Kohler class is the one who developed the insight learning by experimenting with his ape Sultan on how to solve the problems with the use of axes and sticks. Or he concluded that we can learn or could solve problems by the use of our insight or deep understanding. So the idea of insight learning class is that it is a sudden realization of a solution for a problem. So in Gestalt psychology class, we have also the life space. So in life space class, it is a theory of Kurt Lewin, and he said that individual has inner and outer forces that affects our perception and also our learning. So one of the example of inner forces class is our attitude, our motivation, and feelings. While the example of the outer forces class is the attitude and the behavior of our teachers and the classmates. So that would be all the module 9, which is the Gestalt psychology class. So do you have any questions or clarification about my discussion? So I guess everyone already understand. So now, let us proceed to our post activity. So this is our post activity. So in a one half sheet of paper, give at least one application of Gestalt principle in teaching and learning process, and then explain your answer. So I already gave you an example as your guide in answering. So that would be all, class. Thank you and God bless.